Don't do it again. Just wait. I'll hit. Are you ready to advance now?
No, I haven't
Okay.
started yet.
Okay, go ahead. Try and advance with the down button. Then.
All right. that
Oh, this
works.
comes in too, and you'll have that happening. They won't see it. Okay.
All right. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. I hope this will
Wait,
be.
Bob's shouting something.
Hold on.
What, Bob?
Use presentation mode.
Presentation mode. What are you talking about? Up here. What are you
No,
talking?
we're seeing all this stuff. You need the presentation mode
In
in the.
okay, I'm
view.
gonna do stop share a minute. Just hold on, everybody. It's slideshow mode. There. Now, when I do it again, tell me if you can see it. How's that? Bob? Hello? You have to speak up.
Yeah, Gloria, it's the same
Stay out
thing.
here until we get this
Yeah.
going.
It's sharing.
Yeah, it's not it. Click that. See that little thing there?
Oh,
There you go.
okay, there. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. All right.
Are we ready now?
Yeah, but I'll have to let anybody else in who comes. So go ahead, hit the down button.
All right, well, again, thank you all for coming, and I hope this will be an interesting presentation. For those of you that teach science, I wouldn't recommend any discipline exhibited by any of the characters in any of these films because some of them are quite mad and quite disturbed. So our presentation is Man Does Not Behold the Face of the Gorgon and Live, Weird Science in Fantastic Cinema. The title of this presentation refers to a line of dialogue uttered by Walter Pidgeon as Morbius, caretaker of the planet Altair 4 in the movie Forbidden Planet, considered one of the best science fiction films of all time. It's an admonition to his guests, spacefarers from Earth, to look only in the mirror, which reflects the activities of a nuclear furnace which powers the planet. A whole seminar could be devoted to the weird science in this film alone, but for the purposes of time and temperament, it's part of an overview. The depictions, theories, and themes proposed by the examples presented here can fall into these basic categories. We have life extension and or reanimation of the dead, interstellar and faster than light travel, time travel, synthesis of humans, fantastic improvements in existing technology, intentional or accidental genetic manipulation of humans, plants, or animals, visitation by alien life forms, including technological advancements which either harm or help the human race, experimentation by humans for personal or political gain, and of course, everything else which doesn't fall into the above categories. Now, generally, science fiction films will contain one or more of these themes. It must also be noted that science fiction can blur into the realm of horror and fantasy. As writer L. Sprague de Camp observed, quote, time travel is thought of as a concept in science fiction, and werewolves are considered to be in the realm of fantasy. But the empirical evidence suggests that the existence of werewolves is more likely than the possibility of time travel, unquote. We will visit that premise later. The inclusion of fantastic science is as old as film itself. The Lumiere Brothers in 1895 produced a very short film called The Mechanical Butcher, in which a live pig was pushed into one end of an elaborate box-like meat grinder. Emerging on the other side is hams, spare ribs, bacon, strings of sausages, and other products. But it was their countryman, the French auteur Georges Méliès, himself inspired by the magician Robert Houdin, who created camera tricks that would support his fantastic visions. His short, a 20th century surgeon, anticipates the film versions of Frankenstein and features a doctor who replaces the missing legs of a beggar and doesn't stop there. He then adapted one of his countrymen's novels, the great Jules Verne's From the Earth to the Moon, into one of the great classics of silent cinema, A Trip to the Moon in 1903. Getting humans there required men to be put in a hollow ballistic projectile and fired from a cannon, as in Verne's novel. Never mind the G-forces produced on the hapless travelers, which would probably kill them instantly. The length of a cannon required to deliver a payload into outer space and traveling fast enough to be eventually captured by the moon's gravity is estimated to be at least 1,000 feet long. A different approach to reaching the moon was conceived by H.G. Wells in his 1901 novel, First Men in the Moon. Filmed in 1964, it's a story of a physicist named Cavor and his friend Bedford, who build a large spherical polyhedron with bumpers, installing the panels with shutters made of cavorite, named for its discoverer. Cavorite blocks the force of gravity the way a real shutter blocks out sunlight. On the moon, they discover a race of Selenites from the Greek moon goddess Selene, a name which originated in an opera by Jacques Offenbach in 1875. Ultimately, Bedford returns to Earth without Cavor, who, captured by the Selenites, learns a great deal about their hierarchical society. As mentioned, the line between science fiction and fantasy is fragile at times. Arthur C. Clarke once said, quote, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic," unquote. This quote has also been attributed to Robert Heinlein, a friend of Clarke's, and this theme appears in many of his stories. Think about the reaction of the locals if you were to travel back in time to Puritan colonial America with a disposable cigarette lighter. It would probably be burned at the stake for sorcery. Time travel remains the most intriguing of plot lines for both books and cinema. It has been described by the late Stephen Hawking as possible, but only into the future, and to do so requires achieving near light speed. Although the protagonist of Mark Twain's A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court traveled backwards into the past and through space by virtue of a blow to the head, we usually think of time travel as a function of some mechanical contraption. By the way, the protagonist, Hank Morgan, utilizes the Clarke theorem in the novel. His knowledge of trans science makes him appear as a magician to the people of Arthurian England. It was up to H.G. Wells to write The Time Machine, filmed initially in 1960, and to use Victorian technology, which manifested itself as a charming, velvet upholstered sleigh backed by a spinning disc. Imagine a steampunk Everglades airboat. The film stresses repeatedly that the traveler moves through time, not space, and this becomes the plot device as the Morlocks of the future capture George's time machine and move it into their underground lair topped by a sphinx. But the power source of the time travel device is never described. We must assume the spinning disk imparts some sort of angular momentum that rends the space-time continuum. The book was written in 1895. 10 years before Einstein published his theory on special relativity, and with it, the concept of the speed of light in a vacuum being the fastest attainable velocity. The time travel device was explored as a function of thought in Chris Marker's 1962 La Jetée, a short film told only in still images, with narration that suggested what we are seeing are the memories of a test subject in isolation after World War III. Terry Gilliam used La Jetée as the basis for his 1995 feature, 12 Monkeys. A prisoner in 2036 is sent back to 1996 to find the source of a virus which wiped out most of humanity. Like Gilliam's previous film, Brazil, it paints a picture of a disheveled universe surrounding a dystopian prolegomena. The former Monty Python member shows the fangs of antiquated technology barely maintained by a wheezing bureaucracy. As screenwriter Charles McCown stated, quote, "It's a film for teaching you how to cross the road and all about minding where you're going," unquote. 1979's Time After Time manages to avoid some of the logistic pitfalls often seen in time travel stories simply by not addressing them. Taking liberties with the source material, writer H.G. Wells, played by Malcolm McDowell, chases Jack the Ripper through time from 1890s England to modern-day San Francisco. By virtue of a non-return key that Jack has forgotten to take with him when he stole Wells' time machine, the machine returns to the inventor so that he can follow Jack into the future. Speaking of the future, 1985's Back to the Future, which became the most profitable film of the year and spawning 2 sequels, features an improbable time machine built by Doc Brown in the form of a DeLorean. Well, maybe not as improbable as a hot tub, but it's a comedy which illustrates the first paradox of time travel. Namely, if you travel back to the past and change something, you irrevocably change the present you return to, as Marty McFly discovers when his then teenage mother falls in love with him, and he must get her and his future father together before his existence becomes, like an irrational number, not compatible with existing norms. This form of accidental or intentional tampering was on display in the Ray Bradbury story, A Sound of Thunder, in which the killing of a butterfly during a dinosaur hunt by the time travelers can have a profound influence on subsequent events. The term butterfly effect is now used in conjunction with explanations regarding chaos theory, and a 2004 film called The Butterfly Effect follows college student Evan Treborn, whose blackouts and memory losses in childhood allow him to time travel as an adult and inhabit his younger body in order to change past behaviors and set things right. Of course, the law of unintended consequences creates immediate problems, despite the fact that this film owes as much to La Jetée as it does to the Bradbury story. The 2009 film, The Time Traveler's Wife, follows a Chicago librarian with a paranormal genetic disorder that causes him to randomly experience time travel as he tries to build a relationship with a woman that will eventually become his wife. Apparently, the trend in cinema is to dispense with technology altogether, since temporal fluidity has now become part of the human condition. By the way, if you like time travel stories, there's a new film opening this week called The Atom Project. It's about a fighter pilot who must join forces with his 12-year-old self to save the future. It seems like we've read this script before. Now, robots are probably the most popular science fiction trope, so much so that the improbable has become possible and even prevalent as we march towards an understanding of what it takes to build artificial intelligence coupled with an ability to perform tasks. The artificial human, a dream of mankind since antiquity, has materialized in various guises, whether you call them robots, automatons, or clockwork humans. A being brought to life by suspect or magical means goes back to ancient Greece, where Hephaestus, the lame god of fire and the arts, made the bronze giant Talos to guard the island of Crete. In the 18th century, Empress Maria Theresa was beaten at chess by a mechanical player, exposed years later as a dwarf hidden inside the cabinet and able to escape detection by moving into another compartment. Here's a drawing that no less a personage than Edgar Allan Poe created to illustrate the deception. The term robot has been attributed to the Czech writer Karl Čapek, who later said it was his brother Josef who coined the term in 1920, meaning slave or serf laborer. His play, RUR, which stands for Rossum's Universal Robots, was performed in English in 1923. And in 1926, the German filmmaker Fritz Lang directed the first great robot film, Metropolis. The futuristic society, like many supposed utopias, is divided into 2 camps, the haves and the have-nots, and a young woman named Maria is a rabble-rouser determined to have the workers rise up against their wealthy overlords. The upper class convinces the deranged genius Rothwang to borrow a robot he constructed in memory of his dead wife, and through an elaborate transformation sequence, turns the robot into a synthetic duplicate of Maria in order to undermine her crusade. It followed the 1920 film The Golem, whose significance in Jewish mythology and culture spans centuries, about a man made of clay brought to life by alchemical means through a rabbi turned sorcerer. The Jewish legend of the Golem inspired Mary Shelley to write Frankenstein, as well as her interest in galvanism, the stimulation of animal tissue by electric shock that was popular in the late 1700s and early 1800s. Her moral essay on the hubris of man attempting to do the work assigned to a higher power was tempered by the understanding that scientific curiosity is what separates us from the animals in the first place. Her subtitling of the book, The Modern Prometheus, makes deliberate use of the myth of the Titan who brought fire to mankind, but who may have also been instrumental in creating mankind itself from that very same clay. When Edison's production company created the first film version of Frankenstein in 1910, the creature is created in a vat of fire, accomplished visually by photographing a skeleton draped in waxen clothing and set ablaze, then running the film backwards. Quite the difference from the 1931 version of Frankenstein, with Boris Karloff as the monster, which has become more or less the template for Shelley's vision. The monster, far from the articulate vegetarian in the novel, has become a hulking brute unable to speak and with a criminal's brain inside the skull. The 1935 sequel, Bride of Frankenstein, introduced a new mad scientist, Dr. Pretorius, and his take on weird science. The miniature human, the homunculi, perfectly formed. As he says to Dr. Frankenstein, quote, "While you were rifling through graves of your specimens, I grew my cultures from seed," unquote. The appearance of the robot in film plodded along in the 1930s, making rare appearances in serials like Gene Autry's science fiction / Western extravaganza, The Phantom Empire, and the 1939 Bela Lugosi vehicle, The Phantom Creeps. While miniature humans showed up in the 1940 Dr. Cyclops, and revisited in the 1950s with such entries as the seminal The Incredible Shrinking Man and the lesser entry Attack of the Puppet People. The discovery of polonium in 1898 and then other transuranium elements invariably led to the rise of mysterious minerals in literature and on film. Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi, two horror icons who worked together in The Raven and the Black Cat, found their way into a science fiction vehicle in 1936, The Invisible Ray. Karloff, the astronomer, is able to look back into Earth's past and watch a meteor crash into a vast wilderness in Africa. And during an expedition there, he encounters a substance in the buried meteorite he dubs Radium X. He winds up contaminated and glowing and killing everything he encounters with one touch. Dr. Cyclops, mentioned before, in his quest to perfect the technique of shrinking humans to alleviate world hunger, discovers an element so powerful in the Peruvian jungle that enables him to power his laboratory equipment. 1957's The Monolith Monsters takes us beyond the realm of earthly science to postulate a crystalline compound brought to our planet by a huge meteor. When the substance comes in contact with water, it grows exponentially, and the large spear-like minerals threaten a small desert town. No explanation is given to determine the nature or origin of this phenomenon, and it leaves the door open to a repeat visitation. The 1956 film, X the Unknown, deals with all things sentient radioactive mud issuing forth from a crack on the Earth, and even the TV show The Outer Limits, in its 1963 episode, Corpus Earthling, features intelligent parasitic extraterrestrials that take refuge in a geologist's lab, assuming the shape of black rocks. They are unaware that the geologist has a metal plate in his head, which allows him to eavesdrop on the aliens to learn of their plan for world conquest. 1953's The Magnetic Monster is a pure science fiction film, despite the monster tag. It's a radioactive isotope that has been bombarded by alpha particles, so much so that it doubles its size and mass every 11 hours, releasing deadly radiation and intense magnetic energy. At this rate, it will be so heavy in a matter of weeks that it will affect the Earth's rotation on its axis. The solution is to take the element to a super reactor in Canada and overfeed it with electricity, hoping it will fission into two separate and stable elements. The conclusion is actually taken from a 1934 German film called Gold, one of the last science fiction movies made in Germany before the Nazis banned the genre. Speaking of Nazis, whose bizarre and cruel experiments would make a science fiction writer blush, they were on full display in the 1967 film The Frozen Dead, as a renegade scientist resurrects SS troopers to reinstall the second wave of the Third Reich. Even more ludicrous was the following year, they saved Hitler's brain. In 1977, a film called Shockwaves is actually quite entertaining, which features Nazi zombies that swim underwater. In 1968, the film took a horror staple, the zombie, and transported it to the atomic age with Night of the Living Dead. It has since been regarded as a benchmark of horror cinema, with a black man as the hero and the dead being reanimated by radiation from a space probe returning from Venus that exploded in the atmosphere. It owes a lot to Richard Matheson's 1954 novel, I Am Legend, which itself has been adapted for film at least 3 times and involves the last man on Earth taking on an army of vampire zombies after a worldwide pandemic. Science fiction cinema was routinely usurped by horror films in the 1940s. Very little new ground was broken as Universal Pictures ruled the silver screen with its monster rallies. There were a few exceptions. The first version of Donovan's Brain, a novel by Kurt Siodmak, was filmed as The Lady and the Monster in 1942, and again in 1953 under its original title. When financier W.H. Donovan dies in an accident, his brain is kept alive in a saline tank, but begins to exercise powers hitherto unknown when he was alive. Even the Mummy movies of the 1940s reanimate the dead by means of tana leaves, a quasi-medicinal protocol, rather than invoking the magical spells from the Scroll of Thoth, which suggests a pseudo-scientific means of both preserving and reanimating the dead. It's never explained whether these sacred leaves are the sole property of the ruling class, or if average citizens can have access to these life-giving plants. Probably not, since modern Egypt would then be crawling with the rotting ancestors of many workaday people. When Universal introduced the creature from the Black Lagoon in 1954, to add to the pantheon of their monsters who appeared in more than one film, it introduced an aquatic version of the missing link to compete with the likes of the Abominable Snowman and Bigfoot. In 1957, a film called Curse of the Faceless Man transposed the mummy plotline to Pompeii, and a 2,000-year-old stone man is kept alive through radiation in the soil, yet is reanimated through yet another ancestral curse. When the atomic age began in 1945, and the discovery of the power of microwaves to heat human tissue and other water-bearing things, the real value of science began to shift. The so-called death ray seemed a real possibility. And the discovery in 1954 that microwaves could be used to thaw out cryogenically frozen hamsters is a pure example of life imitating art. As the Cold War progressed into the early 1950s, anxiety and paranoia about the spread of communism and the threat of nuclear war manifested itself in film. In 1951, 2 films, poles apart in philosophy, The Thing from Another World and The Day the Earth Stood Still, illustrated just how far science fiction could illuminate the best and worst aspects of evolution as a means of survival. Both are hallmarks of the cinema of the fantastic. The former took a story by John Campbell called Who Goes There, which involved a shape-shifting alien buried in the Antarctic ice for millions of years, and changed the menace to a Frankenstein-like invader crashing its ship in the Arctic, made of vegetable matter and with an appetite for human blood. The latter film has a human but alien emissary who has come to Earth to warn of the dangers of Earth's appetite for nuclear weapons, and the fear that such technology will be applied to rockets and threaten the stability of other civilizations in deep space. There is no alternative, says Klaatu the Peace Warrior, and his robot Gord, who carries in his head another staple of science fiction, the death ray, and uses it at the first sign of aggression to neutralize the threat, unless overridden by Klaatu. 2 years later, the first film version of War of the Worlds morphed the heat ray of the novel into an all-purpose vaporizer, like Gord's head-mounted device. The Day of the Earth Stood Still is based on the story Farewell to the Master. It is revealed in those pages that the Master is the robot. No such subplot exists in the film, but its time-honored theme, according to Klaatu, of, quote, live in harmony or pursue your present path and face obliteration, unquote, is as relevant today as it was 71 years ago. Both it and the Thing carry Cold War implications. Any invasion must be a covert operation by the communists. In the Thing, when an unknown aircraft crashes near a research station at the top of the world, a member of an Air Force unit dispatched to investigate speculates on the nature of the remains and says, could be Russians, they're all over the pole like flies. And on the Day the Earth Stood Still, a roundtable discussion in a boarding house in Washington, D.C., where Klaatu, masquerading as Mr. Carpenter, comes to stay, theories abound as to the nature of the spaceship that has landed on the mall. One boarder maintains that the invader, quote, comes from right here on Earth, and you know where I mean, unquote. When another boarder counters, quote, they wouldn't come in spaceships, they come in airplanes. She responds with, I wouldn't be too sure about that. 1954's Devil Girl from Mars featured a robot named Chani that looks like a men's electric shaver. And of course, Forbidden Planet features arguably the most popular robot of all, at least until Star Wars arrived in 1977, the engaging Robbie. 1954 also saw the release of Target Earth, and television has produced a slew of robots over the years that are too numerous to mention. Robots come in all shapes and sizes, and one of the more intriguing entries is a 1957 film called Chronos. An object lands off the coast of Mexico, and from it arises a machine shaped like two cubes stacked. It's not a robot in the conventional sense. It's an ambulatory machine designed to suck energy from Earth's power plants. One of the devices used to analyze data is SUSIE, S-U-S-I-E, a supercomputer whose acronym stands for the gobbledygook Synchro Unifying Sinometric Integrating Equitensor. Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. Similar to the conclusion in Magnetic Monster, the solution is to overfeed Chronos and cause it to self-destruct. Far too often, the plots of movies are determined to make killer robots out of what is essentially a tool to expand human capabilities, or feature robots that just, quote, go bad, unquote, for various reasons and become a menace to their human counterparts. When the murderous HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey is more computer than actual robot, it proves that an entity with artificial intelligence and given supervision of a mission profile need not be ambulatory to be dangerous. Beyond Robbie, one of the more endearing entries of recent vintage is 1999's The Iron China. Now here's something you might find interesting. It's a parody of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album cover featuring some of the best known robots from film and TV. I'll give you a couple of minutes to look at this, and you can always check it later when this presentation is posted on YouTube. Now, flying saucers are one of the most prevalent manifestations of trans technology. Although reports of disc-shaped objects appearing in the sky go back to 10th century China, the first depiction of a flying saucer, and described as such, goes back to the cover of November 1929's Wonder Stories. In cinema history, the flying saucer did not get a boost until two newsworthy items in 1947. The appearance of a UFO over Washington State, which led to Air Force studies Project Sign, Project Grudge, and Project Blue Book, and the Roswell incident involving the crash of a supposed alien spacecraft. Things really took off with a 1950 eponymously named The Flying Saucer, the first fictional feature to show a disc. We've already mentioned Forbidden Planet, Devil Girl from Mars, The Thing, and The Day the Earth Stood Still. In 1956, Earth versus the Flying Saucers. They were the star of the show. Now, sometimes curiosity is spurred by a fascination with the past. Human-animal hybrids are rooted in mythology. Whether Greek centaur or minotaur, Egyptian Anubis or Horus, such fantastical creations were waiting for junk science to follow suit. Although most writing on this matter was more concerned with the moral implications of such experimentation. H.G. Wells' novel, The Island of Dr. Moreau, was turned into a film by Paramount called The Island of Lost Souls in 1932 and remade in 1959 as Terror is a Man, and in 1977 and 1996 under the title of the original novel. Wells himself described the book years later as, quote, an exercise in youthful blasphemy, unquote, and as such refused to visit the set of the film where vivisection was being depicted. The film was released before the Hays office clamped down on moral turpitude in Hollywood cinema. Charles Lawton is the titular character, whose efforts to speed up the evolution of plants led to animal experiments via plastic surgery, blood transfusions, gland extracts, and ray baths. One of his hybrids escaped the laboratory and he was forced to flee England to his present location in the South Seas. Eventually, his creations rise up against the bad doctor and his, quote, house of pain, unquote, as the manimals call it, and give him a taste of his own medicine. Human-animal hybrids go beyond the realm of movies, like The Island of Lost Souls. The Fly and the Alligator people, two entries from the 1950s, remind us that curiosity can indeed kill the cat. Humanitarian scientist Andre Delambre, tinkering with a device that can teleport matter anywhere in the world, inadvertently puts himself through the machine, unaware that a fly has entered with him. As the atoms are streamed through space, something goes horribly wrong and their atoms get mixed. In the alligator people, an extract from reptiles known to regenerate tissue is modified to repair human limbs. The 1973 film, The Mutations, goes even further, creating a hybrid between a man and a Venus flytrap that is truly horrifying. And the youth serum craze is well represented by the 1960 film, The Leech Woman. A husband and wife go to Africa to discover an age-defying strategy involving a strange powder which must be mixed with an extract from the pineal gland. For the wife, it must be from the brain of a man which kills him, which makes this a significant piece of feminist science fiction. Sometimes the curious scientist turns the experiment on himself. For 1933's The Invisible Man, accidental science turns into megalomania. Researcher Griffin's use of the extract monocaine has the side effect of turning him mad. In the numerous film incarnations of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, chemistry splits man's personality into two components, good and evil, with evil manifesting itself in a markedly different appearance. Only in the 1941 version does the lead actor Spencer Tracy dispense with heavy makeup and rely on acting. In at least one version, Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde explores the use of hormones to create a female murderess from a male experimenter. 1952's The Neanderthal Man and 1958's Monster on the Campus uses drugs in the former to release primitive man from deep within, and in the latter, blood from the living fossil coelacanth to turn a mild-mannered professor into a prehistoric brute. In 1963's X, the Man with the X-ray Eyes, instead of invisibility, a man develops a serum to render everyone else invisible, in a manner of speaking. In the 4D Man, a scientist discovers a formula enabling him to pass through solid surfaces, but he also rapidly ages, which forces him to kill humans in order to reverse the aging process by absorbing his victim's energies. Sometimes the doctor involved has good intentions which go off the rails. Mad Love, a 1935 film starring Peter Lorre and based on the novel The Hands of Orlok, has Lorre as a brilliant surgeon who is in love with the wife of pianist Stephen Orlock. When Orlock is injured in a train accident, his wife begs the doctor to save him. Orlock's hands are beyond the skills of even Dr. Gogol, and he grasps the hands of an executed murderer onto Orlock's wrists. Eventually, the pianist regains some of his technique, but the hands have a life of their own, which include the ability to throw knives. Gogol's aim was to turn Yvette Orlock's gratitude into love for him, but the plan backfires. Eventually, Orlock turns on his benefactor and kills him. The 1959 film Les Yeux Sans Visage, also known as Eyes Without a Face, by the French director Georges Franju, delves into the moral and emotional dilemmas faced by a young woman who undergoes surgery after an accident. In 1966, two films, The Face of Another from Japan and Seconds, the last of director John Frankenheimer's Paranoia trilogy, after The Manchurian Candidate and 7 Days in May, further explores the dangers of identity reassignment. Acclaimed fantasist Harlan Ellison said that Seconds was the best science fiction film of the 1960s, and that includes 2001: A Space Odyssey. Frustrated middle-aged businessman Arthur Hamilton agrees to an operation from a shadowy organization called the Company, which will restore his youth and vitality by giving him a new and younger body, along with vocal cords and fingerprints. The visuals and camera angles heighten the tension during the operation, and Arthur, now Tony Wilson, begins to live the life of an artist in Malibu. But this makeover quickly wears out its welcome, and he requests a new operation until the truth behind the Company is revealed in terrifying fashion. Rock Hudson sheds his reputation as a romantic leading man and gives a stellar performance as Tony. As there have been examples of miniature humans coping with the real world, cinema has also blamed radiation and other factors for a spate of giantism in the 1950s. You have films like Tarantula, The Deadly Mantis, Beginning of the End. The tip of the time, and of course the enormous Japanese reptile Godzilla, is a thinly disguised warning of the horrors of nuclear war. High school students familiar with physics will cite the square cube law, which stipulates that as the length of something increases, its area is squared by that amount, and its volume and weight is cubed.
Are your children old enough to do science fair projects?
They're not. They're not even.
Okay. Well, you're probably getting really good ideas.
Poster. Let me-
Hold on, folks.
Hold on.
We got some feedback here.
Let's see, I want to be in participants.
Well, it's
And
not.
he's muted. I'm gonna see who's not muted sound. Everybody's muted. There's one. Gary, you're.
I call it.
That's
Could
really-
you please stop talking? Hello? Could you please stop talking? Whoever you are, please.
And Gina, I know that Angela knows this, but maybe
Could you please stop talking? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, the spindly legs of a normal sized ant would not suffice to hold up something as big as the creatures in them. Giant humans would also get their time in the sun. Films like Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, The Amazing Colossal Man, and the Cyclops. Radiation was again the culprit. Exposure to an atomic blast in the former, and the latter, a pilot crashes into a remote valley in Mexico, where radiation from vast radium pods does the trick. Also doing a number on local fauna, including a mouse, eagle, trapdoor spider, and an iguana. Giantism returns in the 1970s as a result of environmental compromises. No Blade of Grass, based on John Christopher's 1956 novel, is one of the first films from that period to ride the wave of environmental awareness. As a plague sweeps London and wipes out food crops. But it was the 1936 film Things to Come to first embrace the future after a devastating plague. The world war that H.G. Wells predicted and the wandering sickness that followed finally abated in that far-off year of 1970. And the resultant future of 2036 is brighter than anyone could have expected. It seems that most people, at least the educated ones, dress in all white and live in a sterile environment. And society is split between the progressives and a new version of the Luddites who fear that technocracy will destroy the workforce. In a nod to literary theory, the space gun featured in the climax of the film, to use to fire a rocket, is disarmingly similar to Jules Verne's device and From the Earth to the Moon. Now, sometimes the menace is formless in science fiction cinema and without a specific agenda. The Blob from 1958 features a long-in-the-tooth teenager played by Steve McQueen. Apart from having hitched a ride from a meteor, its existence seemed merely to be that of an opportunist feeding on whomever is foolish enough to come close to it. And the assimilation process, it continues to grow. Where it came from and what its ecological or evolutionary niche might be is completely unknown. A Japanese version of the film also appeared in 1958 called The H-Man. Again, radiation and atomic testing is blamed for creating a race of H-men that ooze and dissolve anyone they touch. In 1959, another blob, this time from Mexico, surfaces literally as the product of vengeful Mayan deities. Called Caltiki, it's released from its underwater cave by the timely reappearance of a comet in the sky, whose radiation caused it to grow. Now, television in the 1950s was certainly a proving ground for far-reaching concepts. Programs like Science Fiction Theater, Rocky Jones, Space Ranger, and Tom Corbett, Space Cadet, and also docudramas like Men into Space. And in the 1960s, there were shows like The Twilight Zone, and particularly The Outer Limits, who were allowed to flex their creative muscles with shows that featured physically altering a man to look like an invader from space in order to get humans to band together to thwart a common enemy and architects of fear. Turning flesh into plastic to mimic an assassinated president, shades of the Manchurian Candidate in the 100 Days of the Dragon. But one of the best Outer Limits episodes, Demon with a Glass Hand, showcased a man from the future sent back into time to find out what happened to the human race, only to have the viewer realize the cat and mouse chase through the Bradbury building in Los Angeles was really the futuristic Kaiban chasing, not a man, but a human machine, whose hand and fingers contain information vital to their quest. To protect the human race, all 70 billion individuals have been electronically transcribed to fit on a coil of wire inside his chest. After defeating the Kaiban by sending them back to the future, he must carry the precious cargo inside him in real time until he reaches a future where the threat is extinguished. It's a sad and poignant look at the artificial man's devotion to a cause. The 60s version of science fiction embraced not only the headlong plunge into monsters in outer space, but also spy fiction courtesy of the James Bond franchise and the TV spin-offs like The Man from U.N.C.L.E., T.H.E. Cat, Batman, and the Green Hornet. Science fiction also got a boost from shows like The Time Tunnel, Star Trek, and steampunk offerings like The Wild Wild West, where Victorian technology propels the espionage and political drama. Sometimes humans encounter off-world intelligences that try to control their memories. 1962's Journey to the Seventh Planet has astronauts encountering all sorts of beastly menaces, including a living brain that tries to manipulate them emotionally by forcing them to recall everything they left behind on Earth. Its ultimate goal being the inhabitation of the astronauts' bodies so that it may exert its domination of Earth when they return. Solaris, Polish writer Stanislaw Lem's 1961 novel, has been filmed twice about a planet covered with a living ocean containing a primordial intelligence. Forbidden Planet has embedded memory in the form of the long-dead Krell, whose technology allows Morbius to reinvoke the mindless primitive from his own personal id. Memory alteration and erasure is still an effective plot device. 2004's Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is a poignant reminder of what lengths individuals will go to save their relationship, and the realization that the pain of loss is not limited to physical separation. 2010's Inception spotlights a thief who steals corporate secrets through dream sharing technology. The flensing of great science fiction in order to adapt it to film is commonplace, and the results mixed. Kurt Vonnegut's book, Slaughterhouse-Five, and Joseph Heller's Catch-22, with its comic inclusions, worked well as a polemic on war and sanity. Only the science fiction standards of time and interstellar travel may be just byproducts of the protagonist's minds. Yossarian and Billy Pilgrim are similar in that they escape their dreary and/or dangerous situations by fleeing to another time and place. A Cold War espionage thriller like 1969's The Chairman, starring Gregory Peck, might not ring true as science fiction. But consider this. Peck, a university professor dispatched to China to investigate an enzyme which will allow food to be grown anywhere in the world, shades of the beginning of the end, is secretly implanted with a transmitter that will allow his movements to be tracked. The transmitter also contains an explosive device if Peck is caught by the communists. A film like Blade Runner from 1982, although based on Philip K. Dick's novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, is cloaked in garb from Robert Heinlein's Podkane of Mars, with its massive backdrop of huge electronic billboards. Deckard, a bounty hunter charged with tracking down replicants who are synthetic humans whose time has expired. The ending is ambiguous, as Deckard finds evidence that he not be human after all. Invasion by extraterrestrial species doesn't always mean conquering by superior technology. Day of the Triffids opens with a meteor shower that not only blinds all that see it, but it releases spores that grow into tall, ambulatory, carnivorous plants. A hospital patient who had his eyes bandaged during the shower and a few others that managed to escape with their sight are left to figure out how to deal with the menace. Bernard Quatermass was a British researcher who battled all sorts of alien encounters, from an infectious fungus in the creeping unknown to radioactive ooze in the aforementioned X the Unknown, to Martians buried in the subway of London. The last, called Quatermass in the Pit, also known as 5 Million Years to Earth, dealt with the same topic as 2001: A Space Odyssey a year later, the intervention by an advanced race to manipulate the DNA of ape-like anthropoids to accelerate the evolutionary process. In a film like It Came from Outer Space, the cyclopean xenomorphs are not here to kill us, abduct our women, or turn the human race into a slave outpost for their home planet. They simply suffer some mechanical breakdown to their interstellar conveyance and wind up in the Arizona desert, and wish to keep the prying eyes of John Putnam and others away until repairs are made. In the Andromeda Strain, a virus hitches a ride on a space probe which crashes in the New Mexican desert. The high-tech methods used to isolate and deal with the virus may these days seem uncomfortably like the methodology used to understand and combat COVID-19. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. In 1955, Universal International turned a short story by Raymond F. Jones called The Alien Machine into a color extravaganza called This Island Earth. While it has the obligatory flying saucer and large-brained aliens and a huge mutant insect/crustacean, its most intriguing offering was a machine called the Interocitor. Its plans were sent to scientist Cal Meacham to test his problem-solving ability by a man named Exeter from the planet Metaluna. Meacham orders the parts listed from a mysterious company called Electronic Services and builds the machine. Exeter congratulates the scientist on a triangular-shaped telescreen for his accomplishments of the task and says that he is recruiting the best Earth minds available in order to solve a war on his home planet. Meanwhile, he extols the virtue of the Interocitor, claiming among its myriads of functions to, quote, be able to lay a 5-lane highway at the rate of a mile a minute, unquote. It also serves as a surveillance device of Meacham and the other scientists stashed away in a remote house. When the scientists get wind of Exeter and his cohort's real plan, they try to escape, but their small plane is taken aboard a saucer headed to Metaluna. Mind control, either by coercive psychological techniques of the use of powerful cutting-edge drugs can be in the realm of science fiction or political propaganda, or both. Films like The Manchurian Candidate, 1984, and the novel Brave New World, and the works of Philip K. Dick routinely use drugs to manipulate the populace. What if thought patterns can be analyzed, predicted Dick in Minority Report, and Crimes Anticipated? His short story, We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, became the Schwarzenegger film Total Recall. The Incredible Shrinking Man from 1957. What's wrong? I can't advance this. Hold on, folks. We're having technical problems here.
Go ahead, try it.
It's not working. Trying to go to the next slide.
No, I don't know. Let's try. Page down.
There.
Close to page down.
Well, that's the wrong way. Oh, here we go. There we go. The Incredible Shrinking Man from 1957 may be the most philosophical of all the entries discussed today, and it's a good way to wrap up this presentation. It's a natural phenomenon, weird as it may be, rather than the application of pseudoscientific principles that cause Scott Carey to diminish in size. In the film, he and his wife are cruising the open water when their boat passes through a strange cloud. Only Carey is exposed as his wife is below deck. Where this cloud came from is never explained, but the terror it brings to Carey and those around him is palpable. Eventually, he accepts his fate and ponders his place in the universe. We don't know the ultimate fate of Scott Carey. Neither the book nor the movie extrapolates his shrinking to nothingness. Like life, these questions remain unanswered. So this presentation is an overview and not meant to be comprehensive or exhaustive. As in any academic discussion, you, the audience, are encouraged to do your own research. Here are a couple of books from my library that deal with some of the difficult questions in physics and their application in literature and film. The Physics of Star Trek and How the Ray Gun Got its Sap. I hope that if you decide to seek them out, you find them stimulating. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you, Wolf. That was great. I think we could do you can unmute yourselves now. And I'm going to prepare to stop the share, but you can give them a big round of applause if you want to, or yay or something.
Applause,
All right, I'm
applause.
going to stop share now.
Okay.
That was really good. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
And stop recording. Yes.
Hi, Carrie.